What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Human Predator Pack Mule podcast. This is a Q&A show, and I'm flying solo on this one from my RV. I live in an RV. I live in an RV on a cattle ranch in the middle of nowhere in California, and it's lovely. I walk outside, and I do whatever I want. There's deer, there are ducks, there's bears. It's a really lovely place to live, and I live in an RV, and here we are. And you're in my home studio with me right now. Flying solo on this episode. I think I might have said that already. And I have two questions that I'm going to answer for you guys. And before I get into them, here's your gentle, consistent reminder to download 5 biggest backcountry training mistakes and how to avoid them. It's our most popular training guide, and we give it away for free. All you got to do is go to the link in the show notes to get that. Here's the thing. That puts you on our email list. So not only do you get a fantastic guide that's going to help you with your rucking, help you with your strength training, help you with your mental skills, help you avoid a lot of the stuff that makes hunting trips worse for people, limits their success, and keep the mistakes that get people hurt, or just like the training that just destroys people so they're not even ready to go hunt. You'll get that. And then 5 times per week, I send out an email, tips, coaching, mental skills reminders, explanations of different types of exercise and why they work. And I even send out great stories on Fridays a lot of the time. So it's a great, and I don't spam you. I'm not spamming you. I'm not hitting you with shit you don't want. I'm telling you things that are going to apply to you as a hunter, to your life, to your fitness. And it's, again, I'm not going to spam the shit out of you. So go download that after you listen to this, and then you'll hear from me 5 times a week, and that'll be wonderful. Your life will get better. So we have 2 questions today that we're going to cover, and I got to get my phone here to bring them up because they came in on Instagram. That's what I often ask for, these questions on Instagram, guys. So if you're not following us on Instagram at Human Predator Pack Mule, I put out the query on the Instagram story about these questions. So the first one we're going to talk about is high intensity continuous training. We're going to talk about that, and then a question about how conditioning, high intensity conditioning, and how much we need to be prepared, right? So the first question is about high intensity continuous training, and I'm going to lay that on you. So here it comes. What should a person do if during high intensity continuous training, single leg goblet squats, which is something that we're doing in the program right now, their heart rate is below the target, but their leg muscles feel close to max effort? If they increase the goblet weight would cause failure, right? So essentially what he's saying is he can't use more weight to get his heart rate up, because we need snappy reps when we do high intensity continuous training. We need to move fast so that we can recruit fast twitch muscle fibers. So I'm going to give you some quick background on high intensity continuous training if you haven't been following along. It's something that we use a lot. We got it from the Russians. It's one of those things that Russia does well. They don't do a lot well. Potatoes, maybe vodka. They probably do those things well. They got a lot of cool shit that you can go hunt too. I don't know if I'm going to go there to hunt, but they got that. Really great at communism. They do really well with that. We don't do as good. Anyway, high intensity continuous training is an extensive strength method. So extensive strength means it trains you to use your strength in repeated efforts over time. You call it strength endurance method. It helps to build your strength capacity. So taking the strength that you have and applying it over time. It does this by training your fast twitch muscles to increase their aerobic capacity, right? So it allows you to continue to access fast twitch muscles when normally they would be fatigued. Fast twitch muscles fatigue much faster than slow twitch muscles. Makes a lot of sense, right? But you need access to them when you're climbing up hills, when you're going down hills, when long into a long pack out or pack in. You still need your fast twitch muscles to work as efficiently as possible so that you can perform as well and not fatigue as quickly. So we focus a lot on high intensity continuous training throughout the year. We do it in our capacity block in more general methods, which is what we're doing right now. And then in the preseason, we do it with more specific methods like box step ups, bent over rows. Now you don't think about that, right? Because we use the bent over row, like oftentimes a single arm bent over row, because what's something that you do if you're successful on your hunt? Unless you're like dragging it back to camp, dragging a whitetail back to camp, stringing it up and skinning it out. If you're in the backcountry, you're skinning a critter on the ground, right? You're going to be bent over for a long time. So training to be able to handle that is something that we think about and we focus on. So we do some high intensity continuous training, bent over rows. Right now, we're doing some stuff that will help prepare our quads for uphill and downhill climbs. We start that early in the year, and we'll carry it on with more specificity as we get into the preseason with our backcountry ready and our DIY programs. And so we're doing this goblet squat variation where you hold a kettlebell or a dumbbell here and you do a single leg squat into a bench and do 2 reps every 15 seconds on each leg, right? So 2 reps, top of the next 15 seconds, you do the other leg. Top of the next 15 seconds, you switch back legs, right? And so this builds that aerobic capacity because you're continually recruiting fast twitch muscle fibers for longer periods of time than you otherwise would. Super important, not only for our ability to maintain our strength endurance and our overall endurance. And this is speculative when I say this, but one of the things that we have to make sure of is that our body is as efficient with using oxygen, utilizing oxygen as we possibly can make it. And I think that developing your musculature to be as efficient, as aerobically efficient as possible, helps you with altitude and things like that as well, because you want to utilize oxygen as efficiently when the pressure gradient starts to change, right? So the best we can intake, uptake, and utilize oxygen, the better we're going to be in those situations. Obviously, it doesn't matter if you're dehydrated and you're underslept because your heart rate's going to jack up anyway, and then you're going to have to deal with all that problem. So it's all negated if you don't take care of yourself. You have to take care of yourself when you're going to altitude. But having your fast twitch muscle fibers work as well as possible is going to help you a ton. Now, in the descriptions of these workouts that for Human Predator Pack Mule, I often write that we want to get our heart rate up into the upper zone 3, kind of low zone 4 sometimes when we're working. Now, that depends on the means. And so that's where I'm going to answer his question now, right? So when we're doing pack work with it, like box step ups with our pack on, heavy pack work, it obviously is a good monitor of it is a good monitor of intensity if you see your heart rate get up to these levels. You're using the appropriate amount of weight so that as long as you're staying snappy. So that's one of the things. We need an appropriate amount of weight, and we need to make sure that the reps continue to stay snappy as we do them. So if we get to the point where we can't match the pace, like the pace gets too fast because we have too much weight, or our reps aren't snappy anymore, they're not doing for us what we need them to do, because we're going to stop recruiting fast twitch muscle fibers at the intensity which we need to recruit them to get the adaptation that we want. So oftentimes in HICT workouts, I will list that. Now, I'm going to make an admission here, oversight on my part. I did not change that description for this workout, and that's where the confusion is. You're not going to get your heart rate up into that zone with this format of high intensity continuous training, because we're just not using enough load to do that. We're loading specific musculature. We're focusing more on the quads than anything else with this, and we're not using the load that would drive our heart rate up that high. So that's all to say, it's fine that your heart rate's not getting up that high. It's okay if it doesn't even get out of zone 2. We're not worried so much about the heart rate for development. It's more a monitor of intensity and knowing that we're in the right place. And in this format of high intensity continuous training, it's not the greatest monitor of intensity. Staying snappy with the reps and making sure that you're not close to failure is going to be your best thing. So that should clear that up, I think. So honestly, I should have changed that description and made it a little bit more clear for you guys. Oversight on my part, and I will fix it, and I will make it better in the future. I reviewed that. I was like, this is where it doesn't match up quite so much. So I am sorry about that, and I will fix it. But that's to say, with some variations, your heart rate's going to get high, and with other variations, your heart rate isn't. And we're not using it specifically for developing any kind of conditioning with our heart rate. It is a monitor of intensity. So if you're doing the goblet format, or you might have even seen this on YouTube, on Instagram, if you're not one of our clients, but you follow there, I put up a reel demonstrating this high intensity continuous training workout. And I mean, I'm using, this past week I used 45 pounds for each, for my goblet, single leg goblet squat to box for the high intensity continuous training. So we're not using a ton of weight. It's not a ton of weight, and it's not it's not going to drive your heart rate up in the same way. So that's why that is. Don't worry about your heart rate. Worry about being able to maintain the pace, being able to maintain some snap with the heaviest possible weight that you can do that with. Okay. So answer that question. That's the answer for high intensity continuous training. Okay. So we have another question. And this one is about intensity with conditioning and how much we need as hunters to be ready for uphills and things like that. So I got to pull it back up and read it. So I know you preach aerobic conditioning because that's what we'll be doing using 90% of Western hunting, but how high of an anaerobic conditioning should you get to those for those times when you really need to cover ground? It's a good question. We use high intensity conditioning throughout the year in Human Predator Pack Mule programs, whether it's DIY or our backcountry ready, and I use it with our fully guided clients. It's just dose dependent, right? So we need to do it, but you need a lot more low to moderate intensity aerobic conditioning than you do high intensity conditioning for a few reasons. First, it takes way longer and way more volume to develop your aerobic system in the proper way by using low intensity and moderate intensity exercise, because you make structural changes to your body with that. The adaptations are structural and not metabolic. So that's the biggest difference. So for example, you likely have heard me, Jordan, people we've had on the podcast before talk about this. Structural adaptations such as it's called, we'll start with the heart, eccentric ventricular hypertrophy. Now, this is different than like the pathological ventricular hypertrophy. This is different. Eccentric means that your muscle is stretching, right? So as blood pools in your heart, it stretches more, so your heart contracts harder and sends out more blood with each beat. It's called increasing your stroke volume. Increasing your stroke volume increases your cardiac output, which is the amount of blood your heart pumps out with each beat, right? Structural adaptation, because we're changing the muscle of your heart. At the other end of the system, we increase the density of our capillary beds, right? Because when we do this training, not only does it increase how much blood we pump out with each beat, it increases the actual amount of blood we have in our body. And so that means that pressure has to go somewhere. So it increases the capillary beds, right? Structural change, and it increases vasculature throughout, improves your vasculature throughout your body, but that's a structural change at one end. We also increase the amount and the size of our mitochondria with these kind of adaptations. And because of that, structural change, right? So all of these things take time. You start to see really a lot of benefit from consistent low intensity aerobic training from like 6 to 12 weeks, depending on the person. But then those adaptations can continue to improve for a while, right? So and then they take volume to maintain, right? You can't just stop doing it once you get the adaptations. You have to maintain it with some volume. Not nearly as much as it took to build it, but you need to maintain it with some volume. So that's why, first of all, and since the structural adaptations also last longer than metabolic adaptations, and we'll get into that in a second. So it's going to have the greatest impact on not only your specific fitness for hunting, but also for your metabolic health and for your overall fitness. So that's one of the reasons that we focus on it, because it's going to have the biggest impact. It also takes the longest to build. It also has the most specific application to what we do. There are times when we're going to have big uphill hikes, and there are also times when we have to run to get into position. I can tell you, just even, going on a chucker hunt with Jordan last December, there were times that we had to run to get up, to catch up to the dog and to get to her on point so we can get in good shot position to take shots from chuckers. There's going to be times when you have to get into position to shoot. How often, though, when it comes to big game hunting, you have to ask yourself that question. And if you sprinted, the biggest thing is that you got to be able to recover to shoot, right? So you can't sprint up there and then just jump into a shot. If there's someone that's telling you that they do that, they're either lying or they're being irresponsible. We have to be able to get to the point where we get our heart rate back down, we're collected, and we can shoot. And so the biggest thing that's going to help you do that is your aerobic training, right? Because that's your recovery system. That's what's first of all going to get your heart rate lower so that it doesn't jack up as much when you do start to move. But it's also going to give you the means that you need to recover afterwards. That being said, for a fully developed and conditioned person, we need low to moderate intensity conditioning, and we need high intensity conditioning. We don't really want to be in the middle too much because it doesn't really develop anything, right? Lower intensity to the low end of moderate intensity develops your aerobic system the way that I mentioned. High intensity training develops your anaerobic energy systems and your aerobic power. And you have to have intense effort for this to work. A lot of times what happens is people think they're doing intense work, but because they're not using the right structure of a program, they feel like they're working hard, but really they're not working at high intensity. Their perception is that they're doing hard work, but the intensity isn't actually high. So what happens is they end up in that messy middle where they don't really develop their aerobic power or anaerobic system at all, and they don't get the benefit of aerobic development at lower intensities. So really, they just make themselves tired. And unfortunately, I'm not here to talk shit, but I'm going to talk a little. That's what most of the hunting programs in this industry do, because they don't understand human physiology to the degree that they need to, or they ignore it and they write really shitty conditioning programs. That's all to say, you don't need much high intensity conditioning to do what we need to do. I'll give you an example. My business partner ran ultras for a little while. My business partner in my other business, my gym business back east, he did 6 sessions of VO2 max training twice per year to get ready for his ultras, to push his VO2 max, to push his aerobic power, right? So that's 12 total sessions to run an ultra. We don't need that much. Here's why. First of all, the adaptations don't take that long to get. If you have developed the aerobic system that allows you to, first of all, give yourself enough volume within the session and over the course of a program to get anything out of it. And what I mean when I say that is you can recover from it. So for example, we're doing some lactic power work during this training, high intensity shit, 20 seconds as hard as you can go, and then adequate rest. But since we've done enough aerobic work between, we can maintain the intensity in those intervals because we can recover in between. Now, if you haven't done that work, you're not going to recover in between, and you're never going to get back up to the high intensity that you need to develop the things that we're working on. So that's one of the reasons too, that like aerobic work is so important. It is your recovery system. You will not get as much out of your high intensity training if you don't have it, because you're going to go out and do one interval, you're going to be smoked, and you can fumble through the rest of the intervals, but you're not going to get anything out of them because you can't push yourself hard enough, right? So we know to get anaerobic adaptations, to get aerobic power adaptations, all those things, we need about 6 sessions. 3 to 6 sessions. It's not just 6, 3 to 6 sessions to get the adaptations that we need. And then with cessation for anaerobic training, it's gone in a couple weeks. So we can't invest all of this time and effort and energy on this adaptation that we only need, that is going to get us a short ways away. We're only going to have for a short period of time, and it only takes so much effort to develop, right? So here's how we face it. Here's what we do. We do a big aerobic capacity block now from January through March, okay? And I start to add in some high intensity work in March as we prep for April and May. April and May, we do a max strength and aerobic power block where we will do more lactate threshold work and VO2 max work. You've likely heard me talk about the conditioning house before. This is the stuff that pushes your second floor, right? Your anaerobic threshold. So we get our anaerobic threshold higher so that we have more contribution from our aerobic system. Once you get above your anaerobic threshold, you're predominantly using anaerobic pathways to develop that, to move, to generate energy. So those things help to push that up and make us more efficient so that even when we are at higher heart rates, we stay more aerobic, okay? So we spend April and May developing those. So we'll do some lactate threshold work. We'll even do a little bit of VO2 max work. Now, throughout the summer, we get more specific with our training. Long hikes, long rucks. Our strength training coincides with that, both from a position standpoint and from a strength endurance standpoint. Then as we get closer to the season, we add in some more sprint type work that will get us what we need for the time that we need it. And so if you're looking at that, so April and May, so we're looking at about, 6 total sessions of different types of high intensity conditioning that get us what we need. So we're doing 4 total sessions of lactic power work. We'll do some lactate threshold work throughout April, right? 4 total sessions. We'll do about 3 total sessions of VO2 max training in some form. Some people will, some people won't. It depends on their fitness level and what they need. And we'll direct people to different intensities of conditioning based on what they need. And then we'll do some of that sprint work as we get closer to the season. That's really it. Now, we can maintain some of those adaptations through the season, which we do. We keep some of our lactate threshold work throughout the season, and we continue with a lot of aerobic capacity work, because when you combine strength and power training, traditional strength and power training, with aerobic work, you can get up that hill and then recover if you need to. Now, it depends on how you hunt, but really what I've found to be the most beneficial. Yes, we use the VO2 max stuff. Yes, we use high intensity anaerobic conditioning, all that kind of stuff. But if you're adequately strong, not saying you have to be a fucking power lifter or anything like that, but if you're adequately strong, you have a great low end aerobic system, and you have legs, like you have quads, and you can drive uphill. That's mostly what you need. It depends on how you hunt, right? It depends on I know guys that have to sprint, and the way that they hunt bears, and specific, I've talked to guys that they bed the bears down and then they fucking move really fast to get in position to shot, wait till they stand up, and then shoot them in the chest. Okay? It depends on how you hunt. But for most applications, you don't need very much high intensity training. And that's, I got asked a question a handful of weeks ago about what's the difference. Does training for high rocks prepare people for the mountains? And I said, no, because you're training different energy systems to do different things. You need way more lactate work to be prepared for high rocks, and you need more specific exercises. You need to spend time on those specific exercises, where we need way more low intensity aerobic work for backcountry hunting, mountain hunting, chucker hunting, upland hunting, whatever kind of hunting you want to do that requires a lot of movement, and way less lactate work. So a handful of interval sessions throughout the year is going to give you what you need. The breakdown is something like, they say 80-20. I think it's more like 90-10 or 95-5 from low intensity to high intensity to be able to get what you need. For people to be able to sustain it. Because there's another thing that you have to remember is, like, you have to be strong enough to get something out of those intervals a lot of the times too. And people just can't generate the force that they need to get something out of them. And so one of the things that we look at is if people are passing our strength tests first before we worry how much high intensity conditioning that they're doing. Because they need to put that intensity into their strength work, and then they need to put the effort into their aerobic work. And that's what's going to get them the biggest bang for their buck and make the most progress. Another thing you have to consider is it's far easier to recover from low intensity aerobic work and strength work than it is high intensity conditioning work, So, and if you look at that with where people are in their lives, a lot of that added burner stress is going to take more than it should, because work stress, family stress, anything else that might be going on, it's going to have a greater cost. And so we have to look at that sweet spot to make sure that we're giving things in the right proportions. It's a long-winded way to say that you only need a handful of these efforts spaced out throughout the year to make sure that you're developing to the degree that you need to. So once you're there, you can maintain it with a session once a week, once every other week, something like that. Sometimes we spread it out way more than that, because especially if guys are hunting a lot. So, like, I'll give Jordan for an example. Jordan hunts chuckers a lot throughout chucker season. I think chucker season starts in October in Nevada, and he hunts them until February, twice a week usually. And if you see where Jordan hunts, or if you've ever hunted chuckers, they live in gnarly places. And so he's getting all of the conditioning work he needs across the conditioning zones. So he's maintaining those adaptations. Now we can go out and build on them, and some of them will decrease slightly, and we can get them back via specific training. But once you build them, you don't need to keep hammering them. You can maintain them a little bit and then add to them the next year, maintain and then add to the next year. But if you continue to just crush them, you'll see yourself plateau even faster. And again, we just have to look at resources and time. It's not necessary because they are a metabolic adaptation, meaning it has more to do with enzymatic activities and things like that than it does with structural changes. Those things just don't last long. So there's no point in just hammering and hammering and hammering them all the time, right? So they need much, much, much less volume than the aerobic training does. So to answer your question, you don't need that much. A handful of efforts here and there throughout the year, and especially some sprint type stuff. And when I say sprint, I don't mean you need to go out and run. I think you can use a bike, you can use cardio equipment, because you'll get a general adaptation out of that. Leading up to the season. So that's really all you need when it comes to high intensity work. So cool. I think we've tapped out on what we need to do for this episode. Thanks as always for you guys listening. Listen, I love doing these Q&A sessions. I love doing these Q&A episodes. So if you have questions, you can email them to me at todd@humanpredatorpackmule.com. Or if you follow us on Instagram and I post that query like, hey, what are your training questions you want answered on the podcast? Send in a question and I will do my best to answer it for you every time. So thanks so much. And again, in the show notes, 5 biggest backcountry training mistakes and what to do about them. Click our most popular training guide, 100% free to you. Click that, download it, and make your life better, man.